In the darkness beneath the Emyn Muil, as Frodo Baggins descended treacherous cliffs into the dead marshes with a corrupted creature as his guide, the fate of Middle-earth balanced on a decision that had been made months earlier in Rivendell, a decision that would horrify most who understood its full implications. Gandalf the Grey, perhaps the wisest being in Middle-earth during the Third Age, had argued passionately for mercy toward Gollum, had insisted that this wretched creature still had some part to play in the unfolding drama of the Ring, and had shaped the entire Fellowship's approach to the question of what should be done if Gollum ever crossed their path again. Yet buried within Gandalf's own words, within the structure of his arguments and the careful limitations he placed on his predictions, lies a truth that transforms our understanding of the entire quest. Gandalf knew, with near certainty, that Gollum would betray Frodo Baggins, and he sent the ring-bearer into that betrayal deliberately, as part of a design so carefully constructed that even Frodo himself could not be told its full dimensions. This is not a comfortable truth. It positions Gandalf not as the gentle mentor of popular imagination, but as something far more complex and morally ambiguous, a being who understands that the destruction of ultimate evil may require accepting intermediate evils, who knows that mercy and manipulation can coexist in the same act, and who operates according to a vision of providence and causality that treats individual suffering as acceptable collateral in the service of a greater metaphysical necessity. The evidence for this knowledge exists throughout Tolkien's text, but it requires understanding how Gandalf actually thinks, how the Astari perceive time and possibility, and what the phrase "meant to find it" truly implies within the theological and metaphysical framework of Arda. Most readers, shaped by the films and by a surface reading of Gandalf's gentler pronouncements, miss the careful architecture of what Gandalf was actually doing when he advocated for Gollum's life and suggested that the creature still had a role to play. The key to understanding Gandalf's foreknowledge lies in recognizing what he actually says versus what people remember him saying. In the Mines of Moria, in that famous conversation about Gollum that begins with Frodo's wish that Bilbo had killed the creature, Gandalf makes several statements that appear on first reading to be expressions of general moral philosophy: pity, mercy, the wrongness of dealing out death and judgment. But examine the structure of his argument more carefully, and a very different picture emerges. Gandalf does not simply say that mercy is good in itself. He says specifically that Bilbo's mercy was rewarded, and then immediately clarifies what he means. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it. This is not optimism about redemption. This is probability assessment. Gandalf acknowledges that cure is unlikely, that death will probably come first, but that a small chance exists. And then, crucially, he pivots to a completely different point. And he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not least. Parse this statement with the precision it deserves. Gandalf does not say Gollum will be redeemed. He does not say Gollum will make a heroic choice. He says Gollum has some part to play yet, for good or ill, an explicit acknowledgement that the role could be malevolent. And he says this will happen before the end, meaning before Gollum's death or before the culmination of the Ring story. The crucial phrase is, for good or ill. Gandalf is not predicting virtue, he is predicting significance, and he is openly acknowledging that this significance might manifest through evil action. When he adds that the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, he is not making a moral statement about the inherent value of mercy. He is making a causal prediction about how one past action will create conditions that affect future outcomes. The word rule here is decisive. It means govern, determine, control. Gandalf is telling Frodo that Bilbo's decision not to kill Gollum has set in motion a chain of causality that will determine the fate of Middle-earth. And he is doing so while explicitly leaving open whether Gollum's ultimate role will be benevolent or malevolent. Now consider what Gandalf knew at the time he made this statement. He had spent years investigating the ring, had learned its true nature, had confirmed through extensive research in Minas Tirith that this was indeed the One Ring of Sauron, and had concluded that it could not be used against its maker, that any attempt to wield it would result in corruption and ultimate disaster. He understood, therefore, that the ring had to be destroyed, and he understood the nature of the challenge this presented. The ring had to be carried to Mount Doom, the one place where it could be unmade, but the ring's fundamental power was to dominate and corrupt the will of any bearer. The closer one came to Mount Doom, to the very heart of Sauron's power, the more overwhelming the ring's influence would become. Gandalf had refused to touch the ring himself, had warned Galadriel away from it, had watched it corrupt Boromir simply through proximity. He understood that the ring's purpose was to return to its master, and that it would use every psychological weapon at its disposal to achieve this return. Given this understanding, what would Gandalf predict about Frodo's ability to actually destroy the ring once he reached the cracks of doom? The text gives us Gandalf's answer, though it comes much later, after the ring's destruction. The ring was trying to get back to its master. It could make no further use of Frodo. Another few steps and it would have been too late. This is Gandalf's retrospective analysis, but it confirms what he must have understood prospectively, that Frodo, no matter how strong, would likely fail at the final moment. The ring's power would be overwhelming at the very place of its forging, and no mortal could be expected to voluntarily cast it into the fire when standing on the edge of the Samath Naur. This creates a devastating logical problem for the quest's success. If Gandalf knows the ring must be destroyed, knows it can only be destroyed at Mount Doom, knows that the ring's corrupting power becomes irresistible at the point of destruction, and knows therefore that Frodo will almost certainly fail to cast it in willingly, then the entire quest appears doomed from the start, unless some other factor can be introduced that will result in the ring's destruction even if the ring-bearer fails. This is where Gollum becomes essential, not as a redeemed figure who makes a heroic choice, but as an obsessed, corrupted creature whose very nature makes him predictable in ways that can be exploited. Gandalf's statement that Gollum has some part to play yet, for good or ill, is not hopeful speculation. It is strategic assessment based on understanding Gollum's psychology so completely that his actions can be anticipated and incorporated into the design of the quest itself. Consider what Gandalf knew about Gollum's nature. He had captured Gollum, had questioned him extensively in the woodland realm, had learned the creature's history, and observed his behavior under duress. Gandalf learned that Gollum had possessed the ring for nearly 5 centuries, far longer than any other bearer in history, and that this prolonged possession had created a bond so profound that Gollum could sense the ring's location, could track it across hundreds of miles, could think of nothing else and desire nothing else with any comparable intensity. This was not ordinary desire or ordinary corruption. This was an all-consuming fixation that had replaced every other motivation, every other aspect of personality, leaving only the desperate, clawing need to recover what Gollum called my precious. Gandalf also understood the specific nature of Gollum's internal division. The creature exhibited what Tolkien describes as 2 distinct voices: Sméagol, the remnant of the original hobbit-like being, capable of something resembling gratitude or loyalty under the right conditions, and Gollum, the voice of pure ring obsession, calculating and malevolent, willing to use any deception to recover the ring. This division was not a sign of moral ambiguity creating unpredictability. It was a psychological structure that made Gollum's behavior highly predictable under certain conditions. As long as the ring remained distant or inaccessible, Sméagol could occasionally surface, could feel something like attachment to a ring-bearer who showed him kindness. But bring Gollum close to the ring, place him in a situation where recovery seemed possible, and the Gollum voice would inevitably dominate, would sacrifice any loyalty or gratitude in the overwhelming drive to take back the precious. Now consider the implications of this knowledge for Gandalf's planning. He knows Frodo will likely fail at the Samath Naur because the ring's power will be overwhelming. He knows Gollum is trackable, that the creature has been searching for the ring for years and will continue searching. He knows that Gollum, if he finds Frodo, will follow him obsessively, will seek any opportunity to recover the ring. He knows that Gollum's dual nature means the creature might be useful as a guide. Sméagol's voice can be encouraged through kindness and the binding power of promises made on the ring itself. But he also knows that this cooperation will inevitably fail when Gollum comes close enough to the ring to attempt its recovery. And he knows that if Gollum does attempt to take the ring at Mount Doom, the creature's obsession is so complete that he will not carefully pocket the ring and flee. He will celebrate his recovery, will triumph in the moment of reclamation, and in that moment of careless joy might do what Frodo cannot, might step too close to the edge, might dance in victory, might fall. This is not prophecy in the mystical sense. This is probability calculation based on deep psychological understanding and tactical positioning. Gandalf cannot know with absolute certainty that events will unfold exactly this way, but he can know that this sequence of events represents the highest probability path to the ring's destruction given the constraints he faces. Stack these probabilities together, and you have something close to certainty. A designed scenario where the ring-bearer's failure becomes strategically acceptable because another actor, driven by predictable obsession, will be positioned to complete the task through his very corruption. This interpretation transforms Gandalf's mercy speech into something far more complex than simple moral philosophy. When he tells Frodo that many who live deserve death and many who die deserve life, and asks whether Frodo can give it to them, he is not merely teaching a lesson about the wrongness of hasty judgment. He is establishing the moral and practical framework that will keep Gollum alive long enough to reach Mount Doom. He is ensuring that Frodo, when he encounters Gollum, will not kill him out of fear or revulsion, but will instead show the mercy that keeps Gollum functional as a guide and positions him for his final role. The phrase, "Do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment," is not abstract ethical instruction. It is specific tactical guidance designed to shape Frodo's behavior in an anticipated situation. Tolkien himself confirms this interpretation in Letter 192, where he discusses the ring's destruction and states that Frodo produced a situation in which the object of his quest could be achieved, and that his exercise of patience and mercy towards Gollum gained him mercy. His failure was redressed. The author is explicitly stating that the design included both Frodo's ultimate failure and the mercy shown to Gollum that positioned someone else to complete the task. Providence in Tolkien's Catholic-influenced metaphysics operates not through random chance or direct divine intervention that overrides free will, but through careful arrangement of causality by wise beings who understand pattern and character deeply enough to predict free choices and position actors accordingly. Gandalf, as one of the Maiar sent to Middle-earth specifically to arrange conditions for resistance against Sauron, functions as an agent of this providence. His purpose is not to defeat Sauron directly, but to ensure that others can do so, which requires understanding causality deeply enough to position the right actors in the right circumstances. When he tells Frodo that Gollum has some part to play, when he emphasizes that Bilbo's mercy may rule the fate of many, he is describing his own work as architect of providence, explaining how careful arrangement of causality through mercy and strategic positioning will create conditions for success even when individual moral actors fail. The moral implications of this arrangement cut to the heart of what Tolkien understood about power and responsibility in a fallen world. Gandalf is not evil. He is burdened with knowledge that requires him to make decisions no one should have to make. He must calculate suffering, must weigh the trauma of individuals against the survival of peoples, must accept that mercy and manipulation can coexist in the same action when the stakes are absolute. Middle-earth faced annihilation if Sauron recovered the ring. Against this totality of doom, the suffering of individual ring-bearers becomes, in strategic calculation, acceptable collateral. This is not comfortable morality, and Tolkien does not present it as such, but it is the position that Gandalf, burdened with knowledge and responsibility that few others carry, must inhabit. The full weight of what Gandalf has done becomes clear only in retrospect, only after the ring is destroyed, and we can trace backward through the chain of causality to see how each element was necessary. Bilbo's mercy toward Gollum in the Goblin tunnels. Gandalf's interrogation and understanding of the creature's psychology. His speech to Frodo establishing the moral framework that would preserve Gollum's life. Frodo's internalization of this framework, despite all rational arguments against it. The oath that bound Gollum to service while leaving room for eventual betrayal. The journey through increasingly dangerous territory with Gollum as guide. The betrayal at Shelob's lair. Gollum's continued tracking into Mordor itself. The final confrontation at the Samath Naur, where Frodo claims the ring and Gollum attacks him and bites off his finger and falls dancing into the fire with his precious recovered at last. Every element of this chain required careful positioning, required understanding psychology and probability well enough to predict behavior across months, required accepting that individual suffering served collective survival. And the architect of this chain, the being who understood it well enough to set it in motion through strategic guidance and moral instruction, was Gandalf. His knowledge of Gollum's inevitable betrayal is not explicitly stated because such knowledge would undermine the moral framework he needs Frodo to maintain. But the evidence is overwhelming when we examine what he says, what he does not say, what he arranges, and what alternatives he never considers. At the Grey Havens, as Frodo prepares to sail seeking the healing Middle-earth can no longer provide, Gandalf tells him, "I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are an evil." This is profound acknowledgement of cost, recognition that what they achieved required suffering that deserves grief even in victory. Gandalf does not minimize Frodo's wounds, does not claim the end justified all means. He simply acknowledges that some suffering is necessary, that tears shed for real loss are appropriate even in triumph. But notice what Gandalf still does not say. He does not tell Frodo, "I knew you would fail at the end." He does not explain the full design, does not reveal that Gollum's betrayal was anticipated and necessary. Even at the end, Gandalf maintains the framework of partial truth that has shaped Frodo's understanding from the beginning. This is what resistance to ultimate evil required in Tolkien's vision. Wisdom willing to bear unbearable knowledge, mercy inseparable from strategy, and a design that honored free will while understanding it deeply enough to predict and position its exercise toward necessary ends. Gandalf knew Gollum would betray Frodo because he understood obsession and psychology with sufficient depth to predict the inevitable. He sent Frodo into that betrayal because it represented the only realistic path to the ring's destruction. The only mechanism that would achieve success despite the ring-bearer's certain failure at the moment of choice. The mercy Gandalf taught was real mercy, rooted in genuine moral conviction, but it was also strategic positioning, ensuring that all the necessary pieces would be in place when the final moment arrived. The cost was devastating. Frodo broken and exiled from the world he saved. Gollum dead unredeemed. His final act not heroic choice, but obsessive reflex that happened to serve purposes beyond his comprehension. And Gandalf bearing forever the weight of having designed a path through betrayal and failure toward victory, having sent someone he loved into suffering, he foresaw and accepted as necessary price. This is the uncomfortable truth buried in the text, that even the wisest, even those who genuinely care, must sometimes operate through designs whose moral complexity can crush those who bear the responsibility, who must live with having arranged causality so carefully that mercy and manipulation became inseparable, that love and use coexisted in the same relationship, that hope was maintained through concealment of the full mechanism by which that hope might be fulfilled. Gandalf knew. He positioned. He calculated. And through that knowledge, through designs that treated persons as instruments of Providence, even while honoring their freedom and their dignity, Middle-earth survived, at a price that reveals how truly terrible the burden of wisdom becomes when the stakes are absolute and the only path forward requires accepting that even betrayal, even failure, even the breaking of innocence can serve purposes that transcend individual suffering in service of preventing annihilation itself. Middle-earth survived, at a price that reveals how truly terrible the burden of wisdom becomes when the stakes are absolute, and the only path forward requires accepting that even betrayal, even failure, even the breaking of innocence can serve purposes that transcend individual suffering in service of preventing annihilation itself. If this analysis has changed how you see Gandalf's role in the quest, if you've discovered layers in Tolkien's work that you hadn't considered before, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into the hidden mechanics of Middle-earth, the uncomfortable truths buried in the text, and the moral complexities that make Tolkien's legendarium far more than simple fantasy. There's so much more to explore. The true reason Saruman fell, why the eagles couldn't simply fly to Mordor when you understand the metaphysics of intervention, what Galadriel's temptation actually reveals about the nature of power in Arda. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss these investigations into what Tolkien really built beneath the surface of his most famous stories.